Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. Naruto strode into the room where the first test of the Chunin exam was to take place. The same room in which he himself had taken the test a few years back. That time, luck was on his side, as the catch to the exam had nothing to do with actual skills, knowledge or intellect. Instead, the catch was in determination, which he had an abundance of. But it won't be the same thing this time, Sakura's voice echoed in his mind as he took his designated seat. So, like I was saying, she told him from her bed, as he sat on the floor in front of her, you need to brush up on your knowledge, as well as your information gathering skills. Naruto sighed, yes, ma'am. Sakura was intending to bonk him for calling her ma'am, but opted against it. Okay, so what do we have in the way of information gathering? Hardly anything, really. He sighed again. I can use chakra to enhance my sight, but that can be too obvious, and might cost me the exam. I could do the same for my hearing, but I seriously doubt anyone would be saying the answers out loud. I have a jutsu that creates a sort of mirror, but that will be so incredibly obvious I'll get thrown out instantly. Goo. Sakura grunted, don't you have anything else you can use? Like I said, nothing that can work in that situation. He lay down on the floor. In my defense, most information gathering skills that can be applied in that situation are clan traits. Clan traits? Sakura perked up suddenly. Hey, maybe you can use the Aohigan for it. Maybe. I'll have to ask my dad about it, if the sphere manages to stabilize before the exam begins. Oh, well, she shrugged, I guess we're going to have to work on your knowledge instead. That's how I managed to get through the first test, anyway. It was long hours of going through formulae and patterns and tactics, but still, long hours spent with the woman he loves. Can't be all bad, now, can it? Either way, now Naruto was confident enough of his knowledge to pass this test. He spent a few minutes sitting there in silent reflection before the examiner entered the room. This time, it wasn't the frighteningly scarred Morino Ibiki, but a young man, with whom Naruto was very familiar. Neji. He's the examiner. He gave Neji a slight nod of the head, which the Hyuga just barely returned. This was not an act of bitter recognition between the pair, as one might assume, but one of stealthy greeting, so as to not raise suspicion as to Naruto's legitimacy in this test. Naruto was relieved to find the Hyuga as observant as ever. Neji proceeded to tell the examinees the rules of this exam. First, the scoring was individual-based. Each person starts the test with 0 points. For every question of the 10 answered correctly, 1 point is awarded, and for every time a person is caught cheating, a point is deducted from their final balance. The passing grade is 5 points, so that if someone is caught 6 times, he's disqualified immediately, and if someone is caught 5 times, he has to get all of the questions correct in order to pass, and so on, and so forth. For a genin team to pass the test, each member of the team must have a passing grade, otherwise, the team fails. Neji concluded his speech by telling the examinees that, if someone does choose to cheat, he should be very careful about it, act like a ninja and don't be discovered. But remember, he said, activating the Byakugan, and eliciting more than a few gasps from the crowd, I'll be watching you. At witnessing this, Naruto mouthed at him, show off, to which Neji's silent reply was a very slight, almost invisible smirk. Seeing the smile on his face, Naruto sincerely wished that he would have been able to shake the Junin's hand and congratulate him. After all, it's not every day that one gets engaged. You're kidding. Naruto exclaimed in wonder when Sakura relayed to him what she was just told over the phone. Nope. He proposed to her on that bridge that goes across the small river at the outskirts of town. It was sunset, and he brought her there blindfolded. He made her sit on the banister, took off her blindfold, kneeled and proposed. You should have heard how excited she was about the whole thing. I did hear it. The screeches of, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, got all the way over here just fine, thank you. HMPH, you're just jealous of Neji because he did something incredibly romantic for his girlfriend, while all you do is train for the Chunin exams. Tenten's so lucky. She finished with feigned wistfulness. Naruto jumped over to stand not 3 inches away from her. Care to repeat that, Missy? He scolded her playfully. Nope, she said, sticking her tongue out at him. Naruto seized the opportunity and pressed his lips against hers, lightly licking her still held out tongue with his own. They kissed for at least another minute. Naruto couldn't tell. He really wasn't one to be counting the seconds as they passed while kissing the woman of his dreams and very recent reality, before Naruto released her lips. And, you know, Sakura said almost sultrily, Tenten says that the ring he gave her was so incredible, and has this massive diamond in it. Must have been really expensive to make. I guess marrying someone as rich as a Hyuga has its perks. Maybe I should look into it. Is that so? He said, catching her lips in another kiss, this time poking his tongue into her mouth and exploring it with lustful abandon. She moaned into his mouth as her tongue set out to duel his for dominance within the confines of their mouths. Naruto was slowly leading her towards the wall as they kissed, their heads moving slightly as they traversed the small distance. When they reached the wall, Naruto interlaced his fingers with hers, holding them at his side. He released her mouth from his, but only to press his lips to her neck, ling at it slightly, and making her moan again. Naruto sat there, reminiscing about that for a few good minutes before he realized, right, test now, hormones later. Looking at the problems, he could see that all but the 10th, which, as expected, had not been revealed yet, were, to be honest, well, this is too easy. Every single one of the problems used a notion, formula or basis that he'd already covered with Sakura in the last 10 days. The first and 7th problems were ones he'd actually gone over with Sakura, practically word for word. He couldn't believe this. He didn't need to cheat. He could get 9 points easily. Naruto began filling in the page, a sly grin rising to his lips as he did so. I guess it was true, if heaven you have not, yada yada yada. He filled out the answers as quickly and accurately as was possible. When he finished the 9th problem, he let his mind wander back to that occurrence that had occupied his mind earlier. They never did progress much, or at all, really, beyond that. A bit of fondling from time to time, a lot of cuddling, a boatload of hugs and kisses, some hot, wet and lustful, but most sweet and soft. He really wasn't sure which he'd preferred, so he opted to not take preference at all, and instead enjoy both types for each of their unique pleasurable qualities. But even if he did want more of the lustful kisses, and what might possibly come along with them, he wouldn't make Sakura do it, or even make her make that choice, not this soon, anyway. She had made it clear to him already that the pace they were going in had to be slow as far as the more physical facets of their relationship were concerned, at least. And it was one choice he was going to leave totally up to her. After all he'd had to go through to get her, he didn't dare risk losing her, especially over some stupid teenage hormonal-charged moment. It was going to be her choice, and he was going to respect it, whatever the end result may be. Now, if he could only keep from getting a hard-on every time she kissed him like that, he might actually be able to pull it off. His reverie was interrupted by Neji introducing the 10th problem, along with its special stipulation. With this last question, he began, the rules are a little bit different. First, while answering this question correctly will yield the standard 1 point, failing to produce a valid, correct answer to it will result in a 2-point deduction. This means that, along with the point originally lost for not getting the answer right, you will have lost a total of 3 points. Second, he continued, if you choose to take this question, and whether or not you give the correct answer for it, failing the test will result in you being banned from the next 5 Chunin exams. After giving the other examinees what he considered ample time to voice the question that was just begging to be asked, Naruto's patience with them had run out, and he chose to ask it himself, what do you mean, if we choose to take the question? Neji gave him another slight nod. What I mean is that you can choose not to take the 10th question, thus avoiding the banning penalty. However, refusal to answer the 10th question will result in your immediate failing of this Chunin examination. Make your choice, he finished sternly, and do it wisely. Naruto then began to ignore the murmurs and complaints of his fellow examinees and waited for the problem to be put forth. As Naruto waited outside the classroom for his results, secretly wondering, though he'd never confide in it to anyone, even Sakura, if one or more of the examiners had rigged his results to say he'd cheated even once. Although most of the village had been acting quite a bit more humanely towards him ever since the entire deal with whom it was that really kicked Gaara's demon-infested butt got to the public, about 2 months before he'd left Konoha with Jiraiya all those months ago. Many people had actually looked at him with respect after that, and it was a very good feeling to have, especially for him. Sorry about the whom, but when MS Word gets that stupid green line under a word, I get tempted, and I never really thought I'd get to use that word ever, so I hopped on the opportunity, DG. But still, there were more than enough of the pricks who just couldn't get it into their thick heads that he wasn't the frickin' Kyuubi. And even then, half the people who did respect him were so obviously doing it out of fearing his abilities. But they weren't much of a problem. Fearing retribution meant that they were pretty cordial toward him, which he returned readily, finding it a fair bit more satisfying than his previous treatment. Either way, enough people still held his tenant's identity against him, many of them nins, so that it was more than plausible that they'd try and hold him back as much as they could. His only hope was that Neji and whatever sympathizers he may have within the examiners' ranks would be forthcoming in protecting his interests. But back to more pressing matters, he was just being approached by a young man wearing a rock Hittite. His hair was long and black, tied in a loose ponytail that reached his waist. He wore all black pants, shirt, packs, gloves, socks, sandwich all black. In fact, only 3 things about him weren't black: the skin of his face, which was as white as marble, his eyes of a vivid green, and the white hilt and sheath of what appeared to be a wakizashi strapped to his waist. Hello there, he said. I was just admiring your sword. He pointed to Midnight, which Naruto had strapped to his back, hilt up, at his right shoulder. I wonder, he continued, how did you come upon it? It's a piece of my inheritance, Naruto replied. My father left it for me before he died. The rock nin gave a noise somewhere between a huff and a chuckle. Imagine that, you see, this sword of mine is also a piece of inheritance. He narrowed his gaze at the blonde. What is your name? Oh, I'm Uzumaki Naruto. He held out his hand for the guy to shake, but was answered with a condescending shake of the head. The genin walked back to where his fellow rock nins had congregated. Naruto just barely managed to make out him telling his village mates, it's him. Geez, who stuck the explosive tagged kunai up his butt? Now, while the identity of the first examiner was of a surprise and a slight shock to Naruto, the identity of the second, as revealed when they arrived at Training Ground 44, the Forest of Death, was of a relieved recognition. Anko. He only barely managed to prevent himself from adding, Nichan, at the end of her name. Why, Nichan, you ask, right? A valid question, I must say. especially considering that the last time you know of their meeting was when she bled him with a kunai just before his previous second test. Of course, that wasn't the last time they met. That was about 4 months prior to this, the day of the second exam. If you'd take a small look at the timeline, you'd most likely come to the realization that that was during the training trip, wasn't it? And you'd be absolutely correct, at that. Indeed, 8 months ago, when they'd started on the way back from the Earth country taking the long way around, of course they ran into Anko, who apparently was sent to formally extend an invite to the Rock for the Chunin exam. A job like that was one that she, and, really, anyone in Konoha who fought in the wars really didn't want to do. In fact, she only accepted it very reluctantly, and with a great deal of additional financial compensation. Either way, they'd spent a few good weeks in the company of the Dango Otaku. He'd managed to convince her to teach him some of the Snake Sanin's jutsus he'd taught her, although she was a fair bit reluctant to have to go back to that particular time of her life. Still, he'd gotten a few dozen jutsus from her over the 4-month period that they had spent together. But she brought more than just jutsus to the table. She took on the job of a sister, perchance even a mother to Naruto, and she was damn good at it. Even though she acted quite immaturely during the second test of a few years back, she took to the maternal duties, so to speak, quite well. Needless to say, she was a right pain in a good way, though. Back to current matters, Anko had made her grand entrance, sweat drops abounded, and was just finishing badgering the brattier examinees, which, thankfully, Naruto was not counted amongst. This time around, at least. Nearly 60 are still here. She muttered, I knew the first test was too easy this year. Oh, well, most of you aren't going to pass this one, anyway. She gave a slightly evil smirk. Behind me is Konoha's training area 44, the Forest of Death. In here, you will face dangers as most of you never faced before. You will put your lives on the lines, like the shinobi you claim to be, or forfeit your promotion for this exam, possibly along with your lives. The dangers you'll face in this exam are not of the forest alone, but from your fellow genin as well. She held up 4 scrolls, 2 ivory, 2 ebon colored. Those of you here with teams will receive either a 10 heaven scroll or a hen earth scroll, while those of you without teams will receive either a 10 or hen scroll, with a specific marking on it, so that you and we will be able to tell the difference between the team scrolls and the single-person scrolls. Each and every scroll is marked by a specific seal, so that we will be able to keep track of who has which scroll. This will come into play at the end of this test. Now for the rules and objectives of the test. 1. You must not open your scrolls until the very end of the test, you'll know when it is. 2. You must reach the tower in the middle of the forest within 5 days, bearing your own scroll, and however many others you've picked up along the way. If you are a single, or, if you are a team, one team scroll of whatever type, or a single scroll of the opposite type of your own 10. For hen, etc., along with however many others you may have relieved your fellow genin of. Note that if your scroll gets destroyed, we will know about it. A destroyed scroll can be replaced by another of its identical kind, both in single team and in 10 hen. 3. The gates of the tower will not open until high noon of the 3rd day, at which point anyone with the required objects in hand can enter the tower. 4th, you must arrive at the tower with your full team, so watch your partner's back out there. 5th and last, the singles will start 1 hour before the teams. Now I need you to sign these waivers if you want to participate in this test. The waivers are to make sure that no one sues Konoha over any accidents or some such matters that might occur in the test, such as injury, maiming or death. When you're ready, sign the waivers and hand them to the Chunin in that curtained gazebo over there, where you will receive your scroll. Naruto stood anxiously at his assigned gate, waiting for the person who was supposed to open it for him in half an hour. Whoever it was, he was late. He was supposed to already be here when Naruto came to the gate. And that was half a freaking hour ago. Not that Naruto wasn't used to waiting for people, what with being the subordinate of Hatake Kakashi, the permanently late Junin, but this was stretching the limits. If he didn't know better, he would have thought he was waiting for none other than the copycat ninja himself. He didn't expect the small leaf-blowing twister that appeared in front of him to prove him right. Kakashi? He asked tentatively. Naruto. The older man replied. Don't worry, I'm not here to try and make the score a 7-3. I'm here to open the gate for you. With the numbers, he was referring to the score of the training battles he had engaged the blonde in preparation for the exam. Kakashi. 6, Naruto. 3. Nice timing, the blonde muttered under his breath, knowing that the Junin heard him with his trained hearing, but frankly not giving a damn about it. Looking at his former sensei's visage, he didn't see his eyebrow rise, but instead caught a slight movement behind his Hitai-8. This brought a shock to Naruto's brain. He raised the other eyebrow. Well, Naruto, it seems that we have a bit of time left to us, before I can send you on your merry way. Naruto nodded in reply. So, can you please show it to me? Kakashi didn't have to say what he meant, nor be told how. If placed out of context, what he said could net him a reputation he wouldn't enjoy having in the least. Naruto knew what the silver-haired man wanted to see, what his sensei never showed him, the Aohigan. Naruto closed his eyes, gathered a bit of chakra behind them, and then pushed the chakra into the orbs. He opened his eyes to the normal sight of the world in Aohigan, various flowing colors, a great deal of green from the forest, much brown of varying depths from the earth, small dashes of blue in the trees and a deep blue, although, he noted with pride, not as deep as his own, from Kakashi. If the Aohigan wasn't only colors and outlines, Naruto would have been stunned to see Kakashi's face in a very expressive mode of shock and awe. After all, Arashi never showed him the Aohigan. Ever. And Naruto had been just as vehement in his objections to show anyone his dujutsu, until my dad tells me I can, at least. Yes, Kakashi knew about Arashi being Naruto's father, I know you know he knows, but I wanted to repeat it for storytelling's sake, you know, DG and Naruto knew he knew, but neither of them actually mentioned that specific fact, instead speaking of Naruto's father, or Kakashi's sensei, instead. It was in an effort to try and keep as little of the sensitive information from prying eyes and ears, and it seemed to have worked rather famously. Then again, keeping such a secret for all of 10 days, most of which were spent in training and preparation, wasn't that hard a job. Back to the subject at hand, Kakashi had just gone through one of his rare moments of contemplating his words to one of his subordinates, both former and current, as usually they would let whatever blunder he'd made in speech slide, if he actually blundered at all. Can you, he began, slightly hesitant, can you tell me what it does, Naruto? Naruto pondered that for a few moments, before beginning to relay the information his father had bestowed upon him when he finally managed to get into the sphere, just a day before. Right, the father told the son, so the first thing you need to know about the Aohigan is that it, and not the Sharingan or the Byakugan, is the eye of true sight. Granted, you can't see the Tenketsu or 360 degrees around you, like the Byakugan, or see the future or your opponent's thoughts like the Sharingan, but you see what they can never and will never see, the chakras of the world. Chakras? Naruto asked, as in plural. Certainly, Arashi said, but, of course, without any Uzumaki around you to tell you, you would have no way to know this, there is chakra in everything. Well, Chakra is just one name for it, the name ninja use, but there is a force that connects everything in existence and is present within all, be it living, vegetable, mineral, or whatever else. The Aohigan allows you to see all of the world's chakras, the density of the chakra's compression within whatever it is in, and the pattern of the chakra's flow within the object. A flow that is unique to the shape, mass, size, and composition of the object. Naruto nodded. So, what you're saying is that if I was holding two stones, for instance, of different size, shape, or chemical composition, it would look different to the Aohigan. Well, the size and shape differences can be easily spotted with normal eyesight, but yes, that is correct. The elements that make something what it is, like mass, weight, dimensions, shape, chemical composition, etc., etc., also change the flow of chakra within the object. Now, as you've probably noticed already, different chakra types have different colors in the Aohigan. Can you tell me what colors you've seen represent what? Well, Naruto held his chin between his thumb and index finger, pondering. Blue, first of all. It seems that blue is the color of the chakra of humans and animals and the like. Red, which is the color of Kyuubi's chakra, is probably the chakra of demonic lifeforms. Green is for wood and other plant life, brown is for rocks and earth and probably most raw, unprocessed minerals. Water seems to have almost no color at all, instead being just sort of translucent, and inanimate objects, mostly metals and the like, are a dull gray. Arashi seemed to almost want to clap his hands with appreciation, but stopped himself short. Very good, but two things, at the least, are missing from your list: fire, which is an orange color, and electricity, which is a bright yellow. Now, the importance of understanding the chakra palette, as it were, is so that you will be able to use it as such, as a palette of colors with which to color the world. Dad, Naruto began, can you knock the poetics down a few pegs, please? I'm not really in the mood for sifting through bevies of metaphors right now. Oh, right, Arashi said, holding his hand behind his head and grinning like an idiot, that is to say, like Naruto does. Sorry about that. Anyway, the blue and red chakras, the living being chakras, are what the Byakugan and Sharingan allow their wielders to see, but they do not see them truly. They speak of chakra coils and chakra pathways, they speak of generating chakra through mixing physical and mental energies. They are wrong. Chakra is not generated, chakra exists. You've seen it. They do not see the world as we do, but since there are more of them than us, especially now, their truth is the more popular one. But they can see the chakra, Dad, otherwise they wouldn't be able to see the Tenketsu, for the Byakugan, or foretell a person's actions from their chakra ripples, for the Sharingan. Naruto, look, just let me speak for now, okay? The skewed truths that you've been taught, I shall do my best to correct, but you need to let me. He waited for Naruto's nod, then continued, like I said, they can see bits of the living chakra. The Byakugan sees the places with high concentrations of chakra, the pathways, and coils they speak of, and they see the Tenketsu, the points where chakra escapes the body, but the flow of chakra, outside of your body's chakra core, their coil, is invisible to them. When they close your Tenketsu, the flow of chakra doesn't stop, but it is blocked. Chakra still flows through your body, but in much smaller amounts, through the chakra equivalent of small blood vessels and capillaries. This is what the Byakugan cannot see, aside from non-living chakra, the places where chakra isn't concentrated immensely. That is the fault of their sight. The Sharingan sees the ripples the chakra makes in the world, and sometimes, within the body itself. They are also able to see the chakra cores which, again, they call coils, but their sight is more focused on the future than the present. Like the Byakugan wielders, they see the living chakras, and only them. But they do not see the elemental chakras, Naruto interrupted with his revelation, and they don't see the chakras' flow patterns. They can't see any chakra that isn't a living being's, or at least mixed with it. So it's like they are walking around with their eyes half closed. Precisely, son, Arashi said with a wide smile, precisely. And we can see them. We can see the chakra of everything in existence, and its flow. And that is where the first of your bloodline abilities comes in. Kakashi, how much time do we have left now? 15 minutes at least. Now please, keep going. The first ability of the Aohigan is what I call chakra manifestations. Chakra manifestations? Naruto asked, bewildered. Indeed, Arashi nodded. Take this kunai, for example, he said, pulling a kunai from his hip pack. Look at it with your Aohigan. What do you see? Naruto activated his dujutsu and looked at the knife. Well, it's a dull gray, Dad. Arashi stifled a sigh. I know, Naruto, but I want you to look at the flow of the chakra. Now, try and copy that flow of chakra in your own hand. Try and move your body's chakra in the same course as the chakra in the kunai. He watched the chakra gather in his child's hand, slowly changing its shape to that of a kunai, although it was moving and changing its shape slightly every few seconds. Good. Now try and force a chakra outline onto the chakra in your hand, so that the shape will be like the kunai's. Naruto did as instructed, and voila, he was holding a blue chakra kunai in his hand. How's this? He said, flipping and spinning the kunai in his hand. That's incredible, Naruto, he said, and on your first try, no less. Well, it was easy once I figured out that it was like a controlled Rasengan. Naruto said, practically shining with pride. Instead of making the chakra spin wildly in a ball form, I control the chakra more sternly and change the shape. That's the idea, right? Arashi nodded. Okay, now release the outline and try to draw the chakra back into your body, and we'll go on to the next technique. He noted absently that some of the kunai's chakra dissipated before managing to return to Naruto's body. The second technique is chakra manipulation. Suddenly, Naruto heard a sharp whistling. Kakashi, was that the signal to open the gates? He asked. Huh, what do you mean? Kakashi asked, pretending he didn't notice the sound. Kakashi, Naruto growled at his former sensei, if you want me to ever show you the Aohigan again, you'll open the gate now. The Junin gave a faux gulp and opened the gate. Good luck in there. Naruto forewent his angry countenance and ran inside, shouting back to Kakashi, I'll see you in 2 days. Kakashi waited all of 10 minutes before jumping into the forest after Naruto. By the time Naruto had made it to the tower, it was already dusk. He hid one of the three-pronged kunai, which his father had helped him attune to his chakra, as the Hiraishin no Jutsu could only be preformed with kunai that were attuned to the user's chakra underground near one of the gates of the tower, and hastily doubled back to try and find a suitable place to make camp. An hour later he'd found one such place, and the sun had already set. Quickly he set up a perimeter with the alarm kunai, and started a small bonfire to cook up dinner, hoping that the smoke wouldn't be as visible by night as it was by day. Even with the bonfire, the night was cold, as expected from any night in October, and Naruto found himself missing his Sakura-chan, and the warmth she always seemed to cast about him. She's a good one, Kit, a familiar voice called out to him from within, and I know I don't need to tell you this, but don't you ever let her go. Naruto chuckled, you know, Kyuubi, I never would have pegged you as such a sentimental. Oh, pipe down, brat. You're just rubbing off on me, is all. Whatever you say, you're still growing soft. The fox demon sighed, stupid Kit, changing me like this. I used to be a freaking terror, doing whatever I wanted, destroying whatever I wanted. And then my dad came and sealed you in the same body with a soul as pure as mine. Sheesh. Can't you come up with a new speech every now and then? Bletch. Why'd I bother? I mean, it's not like I even resent you for it anymore. I'm like a shadow of my former self. I know, I'm such a terribly positive influence on you. It was like a game they played. Neither of them was very serious about what he was saying. Like two old friends teasing each other. Back to the girl, though, Kyubi said, it really is a relief that you finally got together. How is it a relief to you? Naruto wondered. Do you have any idea how much room repressed emotions take up in your psyche? Sometimes I didn't have room to breathe. Oh, very funny. Baka Kitsune. Not that all the mushy you've got going on now is much better. Why so bitter now, Kyubi? Remembering an old love or something? Quote, Kyubi. Don't talk about that again. Kyubi. I'm going to sleep now, Kit. I suggest you do the same. I still can't believe it, Sakura-chan, Ino told her friend. I know, the pink-haired girl replied. I can hardly believe that me and Naruto are a couple now, either. No, I mean I still can't believe you actually listened to me. Sakura suppressed a groan. Well, don't think I'm going to make a habit out of it. The blonde chose to change the direction of the conversation slightly, so as to avoid an argument, so who knows except me. Sakura scrunched up her forehead slightly. Well, Tsunade-sama, for one, Jiraiya-sama, Kakashi-sensei, Iruka-sensei, Tenten-chan and I think Neji-san and Lee-kun as well. Wait, Ino interjected angrily, you told Tenten before you told me. Hey, it's not like that, Sakura pleaded her innocence, she called to tell me about her and Neji's engagement, and Naruto was here. She heard him and asked me why he was here, and I kind of promised Naruto and myself that I'm not going to hide this from anyone. Ino seemed to consider this a good enough excuse, so, does Hinata-chan know yet? Sakura shook her head sorrowfully. No, I just haven't been able to find the guts in me to tell her. Poor Hinata, it'll just break her heart. I know, but it'll be good for her in the end. Ino raised an eyebrow. Good for her. Sakura nodded. Then she can get over him, and find someone else. Ino nodded, and then snorted. Probably Kiba, at least for the rebound. He's kind of like Naruto, after all. Noticing the questioning look on her friend's face, she explained, oh, you know, wild, unruly, animalistic. At that word Sakura shuddered slightly, protective, macho, and so on and so forth. Silently Sakura muttered, at least Naruto doesn't taste like dog. A comment which Ino took as a signal to pry, ooh, are we tasting already? Come on, give me details. Sakura flushed. What do you need details from me for? You've got Shikamaru, don't you? Ino sighed. Wish I did, but he's still stuck in that non-committal mode of his. Doesn't want things to get physical between us because then he'll have to commit and that is just too troublesome. That. And with Sandy always hanging around him because of the Chunin exam, I get nearly no time with him whatsoever. Hey, Tamari-san isn't all that bad. And besides, if you want to get in some time with the baka, you're just going to have to work at it more. Tamari has the advantage because of the circumstances, but you can deal with that, right? I guess so, Ino said, a hint of exhaustion in her voice. Oh, speaking of the Chunin exam, Naruto is taking this one, right? He is. It was noon of the second day of the second exam. And you're worried about him. I am. Sakura sighed. I shouldn't be, but I am, even though I know there's no reason to worry. Naruto can definitely take care of himself, especially against a bunch of genin. Looking at the 9 genin lying unconscious on the forest floor, Naruto sighed. He definitely didn't expect this many attackers, especially not at the same time. Strange that they were all rock nin, though. I hope you enjoyed that, Baka Kitsune, he groaned in his mind, because then at least one of us would have. What's wrong, Kit? Said Kyubi, who apparently decided that the best modus operandi at the moment was pretending Naruto hadn't struck a nerve the previous night. You didn't have to do anything, after all. You let me have this battle. Shame it was against such weaklings, however. For all of his improved demeanor, Kyubi still enjoyed a good fight, especially when Naruto allowed him to borrow his body for the duration of combat. True, but it wasn't a fight, more than a deathless massacre. Hey, they challenged us, so I did nothing wrong by beating the snot out of them. I just don't like you when you fight weak opponents, Kyubi. I just can't keep from thinking if this is how you were when you were destroying Konoha. Damn it, brat, how many times do I have to tell you this? The Kyubi growled, that wasn't supposed to happen. None of it was supposed to happen. That's what you say, but you've never told me the whole of your side of the story. Naruto. I know, leave it. Naruto snorted. I appreciate your desire for privacy, but I'm frankly getting sick of all this secrecy. Someday soon you'll have to tell me the whole story, so you had better prepare yourself. And with that he took off again into the forest, trying to find a suitable place to hide himself for the day he still had ahead of him. He didn't notice a pair of eyes stalking him. Neither did Kakashi. Oh, crap, went Naruto's mind as he dodged a kunai that, if it hit him, would have disabled his movements permanently. He quickly spun around and tossed a shuriken in the direction the kunai came from. He knew he missed long before the thunk of a blade being planted in wood reached his ears. He twisted in midair and landed as gracefully as he could on the forest floor, skidding slightly. Whoever did that, he growled, you had better show yourself. Now, a snide voice came from the shadows, temper, Uzumaki. The bearer of the voice came into the light. It was the rock nin from before, the one with the white sword. Me. Why are you here? Naruto demanded. You're a single, like me, you don't need my scroll. The genin smirked, shocking Naruto by looking incredibly like Sasuke in his. Oh, I'm not here for the scroll. I'm here to claim something different, my grandfather's sword and honor. For a split second, Naruto allowed his sight to shift to the direction of his right shoulder, and the black sword held there. Then, you are Sesumaru's grandson. The nin quirked an eyebrow. How do you know my grandfather's name, Uzumaki? That is for me to know, Naruto smirked, and for you to keep wondering. Not that it was a big secret, but the raven-haired teen appeared too calm for Naruto's liking. Keeping information from the other shinobi might be just the thing Naruto needed to keep from giving the rock nin an early mental edge. Or maybe I will tell you, if you divulge your name first. There was a twinkle in the pale-skinned teen's eyes, one that suggested his coolness and calmness had been disturbed, as he said, Shinji. And your clan, what is your clan's name? It is of no consequence, Uzumaki. Shinji's eye twitched as he spoke. Clearly, at least to Naruto, the man had good control of himself, but a far worse temper. My clan is no more. Thanks to your father. So, he taunted, people die in wars. And that was a war. Guess what, Uzumaki? He swiftly drew a kunai from his pouch, so is this. Suddenly, a sharp pain went through Naruto as Shinji phased out of sight, then back again, driving the kunai directly below Naruto's shoulder joint, into the outside of his arm. The kunai was pulled away from his shoulder, then driven, within seconds, twice into his ribcage, Naruto only barely managing to back away enough that the kunai only pierced flesh, and not his lungs, and once into his gut. Shinji pulled the kunai out of Naruto's gut and back flipped away. Prepare to become a casualty of this war, Uzumaki. He sneered, before charging again. A chill ran down Sakura's spine. Suddenly, she wasn't so sure that Naruto would be alright after all. Tsunade's back was run with cold electricity, and from Jiraiya's stunned expression, his was too. That his body turned instantaneously in the direction of the forest of death only served as additional confirmation for her. Naruto-kun, please be alright. Far away from the village of Konoha, one of its missing nin caught a sudden shock in the vicinity of his brain stem. The black-haired man knew within moments what the sensation's significance was. But it couldn't be. Naruto couldn't be defeated so soon. Don't forget, we still have a battle to finish. Dobi. Kakashi's single eye widened slightly at the display of speed and skill from the rock nin. He's good, Kakashi observed, but Naruto, he thought, seeing the ten's body glow slightly in orange and his wounds heal, Naruto is much better. As Shinji launched himself at him, Naruto dodged to the right, sending his left heel spinning back at the other teen's stomach, driving the air out of his lungs and causing him to lean forward. He lifted his right foot over and around Shinji's head and kicked down powerfully, forcing him to turn over and land painfully, back first, on the strong, hard ground. Naruto, leaning on one hand, spun around and flipped himself upright. Shinji stood up, slightly wobbly, but otherwise apparently unscathed. He spat aside a smidgen of blood and glared at Naruto, drawing his wakizashi. The blade was as white as the sheath and hilt, as bright as the sun, but lacking in its blinding shine. It was like a negative of midnight in that sense. But the shape of the sword. In the few times he managed to see the sword, he failed to notice that, for a wakizashi, the sheath and hilt were a fair bit too wide. The drawn blade followed that pattern, being about 1.5 to 2 times as wide as midnight, and for a reason, too, as there was a single notch, wide enough to fit the blade of a katana, kunai, shuriken or other such items. In all probability, that notch was used in trapping weapons and disarming opponents, which would explain the added width, as otherwise the build of the sword would be extremely brittle in that spot. As Naruto pulled out Midnight from its sheath, Kakashi realized, this was the true beginning of the battle. Damn it, he's fast. Naruto groaned in his mind. His slashes kept missing the teen, his stabs even more so. In fact, on more than one occasion, Midnight was almost stolen from his hands by Shinji's sword. And that sword, perhaps he should have foreseen it, as apparently both their swords came from the same original owner, Sesumaru, Shinji's grandfather, after all. He should have foreseen it, but when the blade of Shinji's sword extended itself to nearly pierce his jugular vein, all he could do was dodge in dull shock. Nisho, he called it, Sunlight, blade of dual capture, a reference to the second disarmament notch that appeared when the sword lengthened, made of Kashoku cane, as hard as Kurotetsu. The metal Midnight was forged of, as durable, and almost as light, although with the added width, and therefore mass, its weight was more like that of a regular steel sword. And that added weight allowed Shinji to make more forceful strikes than Naruto could. Added weight allowed for added momentum and, therefore, added power. But the actions of gathering up momentum were clear signals for Naruto as to where the next strike would come from. Signals that made the strikes absurdly easy to avoid. Thus, they had come to a stalemate. But, then again, Naruto wasn't being serious. You're pretty good, Naruto panted after jumping over and twisting under another 2 sideways slices. Clearly in spite of himself, Shinji grinned, you're not too bad, yourself, Uzumaki. But I noticed, Naruto dodged to the left of a downward slash, sending a quick stab, that Shinji narrowly swerved out of the way of. You don't seem to use any jutsus, and you aren't trying to find an opening to use one. Spinning around, Shinji slashed diagonally upwards. What of it, Uzumaki? I choose to battle you as my grandfather did your father, by sword taijutsu alone. Bullshit. Naruto deftly dodged under the sword, slashing with his own katana, bleeding the teen's thigh. Shinji planted sunlight in the ground in front of him and pivoted around it to kick Naruto in the ribs. The kick connected harshly, driving Naruto to the right. He went with the momentum of the impact, going into a one-handed handstand and kicking Shinji's head down, then moving into a two-handed handstand, his torso towards the rock nin, and spun his body upside down, toes first, to kick Shinji down, planting him in the ground. He stood on his opponent's back for a few seconds, before flipping backwards. Why? Spitting blood once more, Shinji rose to his feet, turning around to face Naruto. You could have killed me just now, why didn't you? Because I know why you're really here, why you didn't use any jutsus, and what you really want, even if you don't know that yourself. And I'm not going to let you take the easy road. Who do you think you are? Shinji burst out, sending endless stabs and slashes at Naruto, all of which he dodged, parried or otherwise avoided. I am Uzumaki Naruto. He went through Shinji's guard, all but left in tatters in his raging assault. And slapped his cheek with Midnight's wide, blunt side. I am the son of the man that killed your grandfather. Another smack, on the other cheek, but I am not the man who will give you your easy way out, and with one powerful swing, he drove sunlight right out of Shinji's hand, and slipping Midnight right up against Shinji's throat. I am not the man who kills you. A swift elbow to the back of the head introduced Shinji to the wonderful world of unconsciousness. Sitting in front of a fire, clearly seeing the blonde cooking up fish for dinner, Shinji realized that he was completely out of his element. Why are you doing this, Uzumaki? He asked, completely untrusting of the older shinobi. Because I think that what you need right now is a good dinner and someone to talk to, and not someone to fight and kill or die fighting with. And you care, why? Still not trusting. Because I had a friend once, that claimed to be an Avenger, like you. Naruto's face turned solemn. I never had the chance to hear his story, to lend him my ear. When he left I wished there was something more I could have done for him. So I suppose you could say I'm doing this because I'm misplacing guilt. He held out the grilled fish on a stick he'd made. Now eat up. Shinji, still wary, gingerly took the fish from the blonde's hand. A minute and a half later he was already munching through fish like a starved bear. Naruto chuckled at the sight. Didn't manage to eat yesterday, huh? He was answered with a grunt and a few mumbles. He chuckled again. Well, he began, wanting to get the first question in, something happened to you, right? Something that made you seek vengeance. Seek me. Tell me, what happened? Naruto was hoping that the answer would, perhaps, allow him some insight into Sasuke's state of mind. It was a selfish endeavor, but one he felt he had to take. Two Sasukes on Naruto's conscience weren't something he could deal with very readily. Well, it really all started with your father killing my grandfather. Naruto listened to the pale-skinned teen's tale. After Sesumaru's demise, Shinji's family was honor-bound to continue serving the same family that he had served. Shinji was born into servitude, and remained a servant until his 10th year. At the fragile age of 9.5, the family they'd been serving, as well as all of Shinji's family, save for Shinji himself, died in a fire. It was then that Shinji ran away to the village of the Rock and joined their academy. At age 13 he graduated and became a genin. Not a month later word came to the Rock of Gaara of the Sand's defeat at the hands of one Uzumaki Naruto, a teen bearing the same name as the man who'd killed Shinji's grandfather. From that moment on, Shinji spent every waking minute training and trying to find out if Naruto was indeed the son of the man responsible for how his life turned out. So you took it upon yourself to avenge your clan's demise, by finding and killing me. Naruto quirked an eyebrow. He'd heard of misplaced anger before, but that misplaced anger had caused this guy, probably barely 16, if he calculated the dates properly, to go that far. Somehow, it seemed that Naruto had struck a chord within Shinji. He had been so foolish. Naruto wasn't at fault for what happened to him. Naruto didn't even know about it all. He began, but found that the words weren't coming. Naruto stood up. Don't. He said simply, even gently, you probably have quite a bit to think about. I'll leave you to it. It would be a long night of drifting in and out of sleep, but, come morning, Shinji knew what he had to do. So from what I heard the Rock Nin kid tell Naruto, God I'm-sama, it seems that your suspicions have been confirmed. Tsunade nodded solemnly at the silver-haired Junin. Another war, she sighed. Well, at least we'll be prepared for it this time, Shizune said, but, about that Shinji kid. Two heads turned to face her. Yes, asked Tsunade. Well, could we maybe offer him asylum? The black-haired woman asked. If the Rock find out that he spilled the beans about their plan, he will probably be executed. Jiraiya then spoke up. For the first time in quite a while, I don't think Naruto would appreciate that outcome. Tsunade looked from the concerned Shizune, to the stern-faced Jiraiya, and to Kakashi, who gave her a noncommittal shrug. I'll think about it. And just when I was starting to get a good nice routine going, too. Naruto jumped from tree to tree, his mind on what Shinji told him that morning. The Rock are planning an attack on Konoha on the third exam, he had said. After the finals, the Rock will begin the operation almost instantly. It wasn't a war so much as an intricate assassination attempt. And I am the target. Well, one of the targets, anyway. As Hokage, Tsunade was, of course, another target, as well as Jiraiya and Kakashi. It seemed that the Rock were intending to strike at the three living people closest to the Yondaime, his teacher, his student, and his son. Well, if nothing else, it definitely explained all of the Rock Nin attacks he had suffered during the exam. They were trying to take him down early. Naruto sighed. Oh well, it'll be high noon in a few hours, and that'll be the end of the second test. Naruto smiled slightly at the thought of a slight reprieve. Tsunade turned to her white-haired companion. Jiraiya, will you just stop fretting over tonight? Everything is going as planned. When it comes to Naruto I can't help but fret, Tsunade-chan. A very heavy book hit his grinning face powerfully. His mouth and nose were bleeding slightly. He knew he was lucky. Thank the gods Shizune and Kakashi already left, or he wouldn't have gotten off so easily. Naruto placed the three-pronged kunai he'd buried outside the tower in his backpack, smirking at the thought that he'd left that team of grass nin halfway out of the forest with his Hiraishin no Jutsu, and opened the first door into the tower that he came upon. The room was just like the one he remembered going into with Sakura and Sasuke 3 years prior. Same colors, same shape, same size, although his perspective had changed, thanks to his growth spurt. The same plaque on the wall across from the entrance, the same 3 words missing from it. Naruto didn't need to read it, he knew what he was supposed to do. He opened the scroll he was given at the beginning of the test, placed it on the floor and stepped back a small distance. 3 seconds passed before smoke began to rise from the scroll, eventually covering the whole room with its gray mist. A few moments later, the smoke began to disperse, and Naruto's eyes grew wide at the Chunin that was there to congratulate him. Sakura-chan, he said, running at her, picking her up and spinning around with her like a carousel. Sakura was giggling as her boyfriend spun them to the point of dizziness. I missed you too, she said when he put her down. She stalled slightly, feeling her innards keep spinning with the inertia, but quickly pulled herself together. Are you okay? Pretty much, he replied, grinning. Tired, She asked knowingly. Pretty much. She chuckled. Well, then you're just going to have to suffer, aren't you? Naruto quirked an eyebrow. What do you mean? You'll see, she said, smirking, and leading Naruto outside through the door he'd come in through. Wait a second, Sakura-chan. Naruto complained as his girlfriend dragged him outside. Where are we going? Sakura smiled impishly. To the village, silly. But I can't leave the forest until the test is finished. It's okay, Naruto, she said, special Hokage permission. Naruto resolved himself to being dragged off to Konoha. The Uzumaki clan house backyard, the clearing with the pond, was teeming with activity as Team Guy and the remnants of the Rookie Nine, save for one severely heartbroken Hyuga and one concerned Inuzuka, along with Yumino Iruka, Hitaki Kakashi, two Sanin, Shizune, Tonton and Sakura's parents, fresh from their second honeymoon, all worked to finish the preparations quickly. Mitarashi Anko was just out getting the last of the refreshments, accompanied by Tamari, who had remained in Konoha for the duration of the Chunin exam as ambassador for the sand, by order of the Kazekage, of course. Come on, people, speed it up. The Hokage all but barked at the makeshift workforce. Sakura and Naruto will be here in less than half an hour and we have to be ready before that. Chop chop. And, for once, Nara Shikamaru wasn't the only one to sound exasperated mutters of bossy females. Sakura-chan. Naruto began when she made for Ichiraku ramen for the third time in the 3 hours they've been back from the forest, but received no reply. Sakura-chan. Nope. Sakura-chan. She was definitely ignoring him. Sakura. Sakura could feel her shoulders twitch at the omission of the affectionate suffix. He'd never failed to say it before, which must mean that, and as she turned her head to look at his face, her suspicion was confirmed. Naruto was displaying a fair bit of frustration with her, which stung, as he has never looked at her without at least a hint of a smile on his face. Naruto hated being ignored, and Sakura had just made the mistake of ignoring him in her attempts to keep this evening's surprise a secret. Doing her best to hide her anxiety, she spoke up. Well, mumbled, at least. Sakura-chan, Naruto said, sensing a slight bit of tension dropping from his beloved's stance. That's the third time today that I've tried to talk about tonight and you try to distract me with ramen. Something's wrong, Sakura-chan, and I think I know what it is. Sakura suddenly felt a fierce desire to swallow. You do. Naruto nodded, a small smile gracing his lips. Your parents came back today, didn't they? Well, yes, but what does that have to do with any? She was halted by the finger at her lips that leading to a seemingly knowing, understanding and compassionate look on her boyfriend's face. Now that your parents are back, I'll need to leave your house and start living on my own, in my own house. He led her to a bench on the side of the road, where he sat down next to her, holding her hand in his on his lap. You're worrying that the distance between us is going to make the past 2 weeks seem like just a pleasant dream, and we'll slowly drift away and go back to being just friends like nothing ever happened. Like I didn't say, I love you. Like you didn't say the same. And though that was not the reason for Sakura's eagerness to not speak about tonight, she was now getting concerned over the subject, because not only did those concerns echo within her each and every day this week, but the fact that Naruto knew to phrase them meant that he'd felt them as well. Naruto. He didn't wait for her to continue. Well, that isn't what's going to happen, Sakura-chan. Nothing will ever make me give us up, okay? Nothing. I love you too much to let 1.5 miles of Konoha stand between us like that. So don't worry, okay? Even if we don't live in the same house, I refuse to believe you'll stop loving me. But how can you be so sure that nothing will change? I didn't say that, Sakura-chan. When I leave your house to live in my own, I won't be able to see you every single second of every single day. I won't be able to sleep beside you every night. I won't be able to tell you that I love you whenever the mood strikes me. I'll miss you every second I'm not with you, just like the past 2 weeks, only there'll be a lot more of those seconds. Everything will change, except for the fact that I love you, and that you love me. They sat there in silence for several moments before Naruto noticed a few wet spots on the ground by the bench, and looked to Sakura's face to see her smiling softly, small specks of moisture dripping from her eyes. Sakura-chan, how do you do it? She asked. How do you make all of my concerns go away just by holding my hand and saying what you think? How do you make everything better just by being there? Naruto stood up, picking her up with him, kissed her lips softly once, then began heading towards his house, his arm in hers. He turned his head to face her and said, simply, because I love you. It was a surprise birthday party for Naruto. Or at least was meant to be one. Well, the birthday they got down pat, but trying to surprise the infamous #1 ninja at surprising people, even if back in the day he was a bit, or a lot, of a screw-up, was, more than anything, moot, especially after said shinobi had been training under the ever-sneaking Jiraiya, and had to watch the old man's back from thieving, ladies of the night, on much more than one occasion. And trying to fool his hearing, Naruto scoffed mentally at the idea. Trying to fool the hearing of a person housing a biju for any time over 15 years, while treating him as a basically normal 17-year-old ninja was, to say the least, useless. Not many people know this, Naruto belonging to the small group of people in the know, but after a certain period of time, demon-like lifeforms begin to sync up with their vessels. At first it is mentally, and the stronger will commands the change, and who will change, and afterwards, at about 15 years into the period the demon is sealed within its vessel, physical changes and special talents would be given to the vessel, depending on his or her demon. For instance, a human housing a succubus or an incubus would first, if the demon has a stronger will, experience a loss of timidity, increased confidence, and greatly increased libido, among other things, depending on the demon's personality, as Kyuubi kept hammering into Naruto's consciousness that like all humans, all demons have unique personalities. Later, the vessel will gain certain qualities that befit his or her tenant, such as amazing beauty, charm, and the ability to replenish one's life force by feeding on another's. In Naruto's case, it was he that held the stronger personality, and thus changed Kyuubi's, and the basic abilities of the fox demon, such as vast stores of chakra, strength, speed, agility and enhanced talents in chakra control and emission, the cause of his very quick learning of the Aohigans, chakra manifestations, were the first part of Naruto's demonic inheritance, so to speak. But that is really besides the subject. The subject being none other than the birthday party held for Naruto, a magnificent celebration with all his friends, sans Konohamaru and his 2 friends, who were away on their first sea mission. Naruto, still arm in arm with Sakura, flitted from one group of guests to the other, looking for all the world like the host of this party, of which he wasn't even aware until half an hour ago. Eventually, he and Sakura had made their way to Neji and Tenten, who were tucked away under a tree by the pond, cuddling. He vanished from Sakura's side in a second and appeared again behind the couple, shouting, "Boo!" It was just too cute an image not to wreck. When Tenten caught her breath, she glared at Naruto, but spoke to Sakura, "Sakura-chan, can't you keep your boy on a leash or something?" Sakura was looking at Naruto as if she was suddenly struck by the strongest urge to smack him upside the head, but instead sighed, "Nothing I can do, Tenten-chan. I've tried and tried, and I bear the marks to prove it," chimed in Naruto. "But I can't seem to do anything about it." "Well, if anyone can do it, Sakura-san," Neji said, "it's you. For all of our sakes, do whatever it takes. We believe in you. Oh, don't worry about it, Neji-san, Sakura said, a slightly malignant glint in her eyes as she looked at Naruto. I will do whatever I must. Naruto rolled his eyes and flipped onto the pond, kicking a bit of water at the threesome, and you will fail, honey. Slightly stunned by the first time he had used a pet name for her, but slightly angrier still, she jumped into the water in front of him, and twirled her finger on the bit of chest exposed between his shirt and his neck, saying, "You need to believe in me more," and she kissed him hard on the lips, before whispering at him, "Naruto-kun." Naruto's mind had just boggled at two things he definitely and in every single circumstance would still have found his mind boggle over. Sakura had not only just initiated a public display of affection towards him for the first time, as he had initiated all of the former, but she had also called him Naruto-kun, and not just Naruto. Suddenly, a push at his chest and the feel of cold water surrounding him unboggled his mind, and he stuck his tongue out at the woman of his dreams. That was a cheap trick, Sakura-chan. Sakura nodded and winked, before reaching her hand out to him, which he grabbed. Say, Sakura-chan, he then said, is the shirt you're wearing tight or somewhat see-through? No, she said warily. Why do you ask? She began, before catching the evil glint in his eyes. Oh, no, Naruto, she pleaded, trying to free her hand from his grip before his devious plan comes to fruition. No. Naruto only smiled at her innocently, before pulling her into the water and on top of him. Baka! She groaned half-heartedly, then, noticing she was lying on him, leaned her body back up, before being caught in the rising Naruto's hug and kiss. He lifted them both up, still holding and kissing her passionately, only stopping at the sudden sound of a cough from where he vaguely remembered leaving those two people. What were their names again? Uzumaki, began Tenten, sounding amused at seeing the half-glazed eyes of the two wet teens in front of her. If you wanted the good make-out spot for yourself, you could have just said so. We would have said, no, Neji continued for her, looking just as amused, but you still could have asked. Sakura was the first to shake the kiss, intensity off and step out of the water, followed closely by a flushed Naruto, who hurried to laugh the teasing off, saying, oh, no, nothing like that. We just came by to tell you congratulations on that whole engagement thing. As expected, Tenten's eyes went star-struck and cheeks went rosy. Oh, thank you. Naruto walked up to Neji and grasped his hand firmly. Way to go, man. Thanks, Naruto. So, Sakura began, when is the big day? Have you decided yet? No, not really, said Tenten. We were thinking about something a couple of months from now, though. Well, not to stick my nose in where it doesn't belong, but you might want to move it up to sometime this month, or before the third exam, at least. What? Neji wondered. Why? Well, I'm not sure I can tell you why yet. It's kind of confidential, and it's a pretty recent development, so I'm not sure how much I can say about it, but, he paused for quite a bit, before shrugging, oh, well, I'll tell you later as much as Tsunade-bachan lets me. And he walked off to the next group, which was comprised of Choji, Shikamaru, Ino and Tamari, Sakura at his side. Said girl was looking at him with slight suspicion. What aren't you telling me, Naruto-kun? What happened in the forest? She only noticed the suffix a good while later, at which point she decided she liked it. Things were simple like that, when it came to Naruto. Naruto wrapped his can of soda with a kunai, calling the attention of all of his friends to him as he stood in the middle of the clearing. He cleared his throat once before speaking. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you all for making this incredible party for my birthday. Now, there is something I need to tell you all, and I have just been notified by Tsunade-bachan. He dodged a sake bottle thrown at his head. Hokage-sama, I mean, of just how much I can tell you all. As all of you know, Today I passed the second test of the Chunin exam, at least so long as they don't go to preliminaries. Actually, Anko spoke up in a half slur, the singles don't have to compete in preliminary matches, because in the final tournament you have your own battle tree until the final match. Even better, Naruto smirked, raising his can in Anko's direction as a show of appreciation. Either way, during the second test I fought a rock nin who, after a good bit of enlightenment, shall we say, divulged a bit of information that led me, as well as Tsunade Hokage-sama and several others to believe that the village of Konoha might be in danger after the third test. Though Tsunade-sama is doing everything she can to have the village prepared for whatever may happen, and I don't believe any of us should neglect our training a single bit in the coming month, I do have something more important for all of you, that I was taught, if inadvertently, by Ero Sennin, another sake bottle, by Jiraiya Hentai years ago. In the next month, I'd like for you all to live your lives to the fullest. Do what makes you happy. Do what you feel is right, without surrendering to concerns or fear. He raised his can high above his head. In short, he started once everyone else held their cans, bottles or glasses up, to living your life freely, to love and be loved, to not be afraid, and to having no regrets at the end of it all. A resounding muttering of cheers echoed within the clearing, and Naruto gulped down his soda. Naruto had seen every one of his guests off at the door by the clock had struck 11, but Sakura was still there with him, helping to finish the tidying up of the place. He walked up behind her and hugged her, resting his head on her left shoulder. Thanks for tonight, Sakura-chan. Hey, it wasn't all me, she said, leaning back into him, smiling. The idea was originally Tsunade-sama and Jiraiya-sama's. Still, he sighed, pulling a lock of hair behind her ear and kissing her cheek. Thanks. She turned her head to the side, catching his lips in hers. After a short soft kiss she grinned, you're welcome. They stood there, enjoying each other's warmth for a few minutes before Naruto spoke up. Well, it's getting pretty late, honey. Shouldn't you start heading back home? There he goes with that pet name again. It almost always seemed to be Naruto making the first moves, and forging the way into the next level of intimacy for them. Sakura admitted to herself that she much preferred that to being the chaser, as the case always was with Sasuke. Why would you like me to leave? She asked teasingly. There's nothing in the world I'd want less than that right now. He squeezed her body to him, stifling a yawn. Then I don't have to go anywhere. Naruto-kun, she turned around and kissed him full on the lips, before leading him inside and towards his bedroom. What about your parents? Naruto asked drowsily. Sakura shrugged. I told them I might be staying the night here, so they won't be worried. She opened the door to the master bedroom of the house, and led him to the bed. That's good, he said, lying down on the soft downy sheets, nearly dropping off right then and there, but still awake enough to pull his girlfriend down with him. He held her to him, spooning with her and planting soft kisses at her neck and shoulders before finally falling asleep. Sakura followed him into contented slumber shortly afterwards. Nara Shikamaru was a genius of over 200 IQ. Shikamaru had a brain so fantastic he could come up with complex strategies within seconds, while accounting for multiple variables, without fail. And, for once, Shikamaru didn't have a shade of a plan, not a drizzle of an idea, and not the slightest glimmer of a strategy. For when it came to women, as all inexperienced men, Shikamaru was a complete and total idiot. And it was this that led him to do the unthinkable, the unimaginable, the most unholy of deeds. He'd come to ask Naruto for advice. What's even stranger, they were talking over a game of Go. Shikamaru had never thought of Naruto as one for games that required such focused long-term thought, but apparently many opinions of the blonde-haired shinobi were destined to change. And stranger still was the fact that Naruto was actually presenting Shikamaru a bit of a challenge. He kept finding surprising manners of acquiring territories and stabilizing structures, the likes of which even Shikamaru hadn't thought of. So, Naruto began as he placed a white stone on the go board. DG, you wanted to talk about something when you came in, right? Shikamaru nodded, and went back to planning his next 5 to 10 moves. Naruto quirked an eyebrow, before clarifying his unspoken question, what did you want to talk about, Shikamaru? He had to suppress a glare after noticing a satisfied smirk rising to the lips of the Chunin. Naruto hated being manipulated, even in such small ways. Shikamaru's smirking visage quickly fell back to the thoughtful countenance it had bared prior. It's about Ino and Temari. He said quietly. Ah, Naruto said knowingly, placing one more stone on the goban before standing up and walking away from the pergola-shaded porch, and towards the pond, gesturing for Shikamaru to follow him. I should have known the only subject you'd come to me for advice in was girl issues. Well, I don't know any other Konoha shinobi that had 2 girls fall for him. Naruto looked at Shikamaru in puzzlement for a good few moments, before he realized who the Chunin had meant. Hinata-chan. Shikamaru nodded. A silence covered both of them for a few minutes, before Shikamaru spoke up again. How did you choose? How am I supposed to make that choice? Well, Naruto began, first off, there is a big difference between our situations, Shikamaru. While you only started thinking about the romantic aspects of life a few years ago, I had been in love with, and pining over Sakura for years before that. While I was in love with Sakura, I wasn't in love with Hinata, so there was no way I could have chosen her, even though I did like her. You, on the other hand, I assume, aren't in love, per se, with either Ino or Temari, right? Shikamaru nodded. While I like them both very much, you are correct in saying that I am not in love with either of them. But then, if you aren't in love with either of them, why must you make a choice now? Because if I don't make a choice now, before the feelings begin to run too deep, the one I don't choose will be hurt greatly, and that would be much too troublesome. Naruto chimed in with a smirk, which fell when he caught the serious look on Shikamaru's face. No, it would be too heartbreaking for me. I need to choose now, because I won't be able to choose later on. And if you can't choose, we'll all hurt in the end. Exactly. Naruto sat at the edge of the water, contemplating his friend's situation, and trying to find a solution to his predicament. When he heard the sound of rustling grass, he knew the Chunin had just gone into his meditative pose. Shikamaru stood in front of the Yamanaka flower shop, nervous as all hell. I just know I'm going to get walloped at the end of all this. Naruto's idea was really very simple. Over the month leading up to the 3rd test of the Chunin exam, Shikamaru was to date both Temari and Ino, pending the consent of both girls, and decide thereafter who he wants to be with. He had asked Naruto about what standard he should judge the relationships by, as both women were pretty similar in personality. Naruto's answer was thus: the most important thing about being in a romantic relationship isn't how much the other person loves you, or how you feel about them, so long as you do feel a certain degree of love for them, that is, but how you feel about yourself when you are around them. The best and most long-lasting relationships, which allow both individuals to develop as best as possible, are those where both people receive something or some things from the other that they can't receive anywhere else. You'll know, he had said, eventually, you'll figure out who you love the most because you'll love the Shikamaru that comes out when you are with that girl the most. Right, so now I just have to ask both of the girls to date me at the same time, and hope I survive today to actually make it to the dates. Sighing at the troublesomeness of it all, he stepped into the flower shop. Yamanaka Ino looked at the figure sitting on her windowsill with an amused glint in her eye. Tamari. Ino. So, lazy boy talked to you too, huh? The ambassador of the sand nodded. So, what did you tell him? Same as you did, Ino. I needed to think about my answer. Ino nodded slowly. I've thought about it a lot today, you know. Pros and cons. And I'm going to agree to it. You really like him, don't you? Yeah, I do. And so do you. Yeah, I'm going to agree to it too. So, what do we do? The fan-wielding girl sighed. I don't know. Well, obviously, I'm not giving him up without a fight, but I don't want to be enemies with you. Yeah, I mean, I might call you a name behind your back at times, because you get all of Shika-kun's time lately, but looking past that, there's no actual reason we shouldn't be friends. True. Besides, Shikamaru has enough problems making this choice without us going all bitter enemies-ish. Right, then, Ino held out her hand, friends who happened to like the same guy. Yeah, Tamari took the offered hand, friends. They stood there, smiling smiles that weren't forced, as could have been the case if such a pact had been made between the Sasuke-enamored Ino and Sakura of a few years past, and not the Ino and Tamari of today, but true, genuine smiles. A Tamari's smile faltered slightly. Do you really think this will work? Ino paused a bit, then smiled even stronger. It will if we let it. 2 weeks have passed since Shikamaru had begun dating Ino and Tamari. 2 weeks of trying to settle within himself which of the girls he loved more. Basically, 2 weeks of an amazingly awesome, if slightly guilt-tripped, love life. No, not like that, pervs, DG. 2 weeks, during which Shikamaru had finally come to a conclusion. A choice. He finally chose which of the two girls he would will the rest of his life to. Tamari. The fan-wielding femme fatale of the sand. It was her, no doubt about it. Only her. While Ino's personality screamed for his compliance, Tamari's screamed for his defiance. Each smile was a challenge, each wink, a dare. Everything about the woman screamed, I dare you. And he answered those dares. Tamari made him try to be better, stronger, smarter. She never asked him to be those things, yet, when he was with her, he felt he should be those things. Tamari, without trying, by just being herself, drove him to become more than he was, to live a life that had more in it than the boring life he yearned for as a child. She was his inspiration. He loved her. Ino walked through the streets of Konoha, her smile falling from her face bit by bit, at a steady pace. The same fake smile she plastered on her face when she congratulated Shikamaru and Tamari a few minutes ago. What was she supposed to do? After all, she had agreed to this, and she promised that she wouldn't make a fuss if he didn't pick her in the end. Shamefully, Ino had to admit, she never believed he wouldn't pick her. She fought back the tears that threatened to fall from her eyes, her smile now long gone. She didn't even notice the tall male figure standing in the middle of the street before she collided with him. Teary-eyed, she looked up and into two clear pools of azure and cerulean. Again she pulled out a smile and wiped the last vestiges of tears from her own orbs of cyan. Naruto. Ino, he said with hesitance. He saw her crying, and the fake smile wasn't fooling him any. But how could he broach the subject of what was obviously Shikamaru's rejection of her? Yeah, she replied. Ino, look, I know I'm no Sakura-chan, but if you need someone to hear you, if you have anything you need to get off your shoulders, well, I'm here. She looked at his face, shining with warmth and concern, and his eyes, shimmering with the same, and she couldn't handle it anymore. Ino fell forward onto his chest, sobbing softly. Naruto didn't expect such an outburst from the girl, but tentatively wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. It's okay, Ino, He said softly, let it all out. She hiccuped, and she collapsed against him once more. They spent a few more minutes like that, her crying, and him wishing she'd stop, before Naruto decided to move the scene from the middle of the street. He picked Ino bridal style and hopped to the nearest roof. He set Ino down at the top of the roof, and crouched beside her. Are you better now? Ino shook her head. No, I'm not, it's still too fresh in my mind. Naruto sighed and sat down heavily next to her. Damn it. I hate seeing girls cry. That comment elicited a slight chuckle from the distraught Yamanaka. See, isn't that better? He asked, a wide grin on his face. She smiled at him a bit, a smile that faltered slightly a few moments later. Yeah, but, Naruto sighed again. I know how you feel, Ino. Said girl looked at him strangely. My heart was broken once too, remember? Ino nodded solemnly, burying her head between her knees. I don't know that I can be as strong as you were. Strong? Yeah, she exclaimed. Sakura broke your heart, but you just went on with it. A silence fell on the pair, confusing Ino. She looked sideways from her knees, seeing Naruto with a sullen smile on his face. Just another mask, Ino. Naruto, I have a lifelong experience with wearing masks, to cover up my weaknesses, from my enemies, from my friends, from myself. Naruto, I wasn't strong then, Ino. He said, looking up towards the stars, a small glinting at his cheek, the only evidence that a tear had fallen at the memory. I was just as weak as you are, maybe even weaker. I just had a lot more training in hiding sadness and disappointment. He turned to the side, lying down on the rooftop, looking up at the stars, and reminding Ino incredibly of Shikamaru. So, how do I get over this now? She asked him. Naruto shrugged. I don't know. I think the most important thing for you to do is recognize that no matter what all the possibilities may have been, there is only one that came to be. You need to recognize that what happened, happened and try to move on with your life. It isn't going to be easy, or quick, or painless, but it is the best thing for you to do. They stayed there for a few minutes more, silent in the coolness of the November air, before Naruto stood up, hugged Ino one last time, and told her, get better, Ino-chan. With a grin on his face, he hopped away. Thanks, she whispered when he went out of earshot, Naruto-kun. It would be later that night that Ino pondered the validity of the proverb that stated, the best way to get over one man is to get under a new one. Especially against the value of her friendship with Sakura. Friendship won the battle, but the proverb seemed to want it to become a war. Something is up between those two, thought Naruto. He had been sparring well. Demolishing a small bit of the forest might be a more suiting description, with Kakashi that afternoon. When Anko came over to drop off a set of clothes she bought him for his birthday, he didn't dare tell her how old that made her seem, for fear of certain death, or at least a very hurt scrotum. When Kakashi spotted Anko, he accidentally allowed a very strong punch of Naruto's past his defenses and into his ribs. After a 15-feet-long skid, he coughed up some blood and shuddered slightly, before falling face down to the floor, catching his breath. Anko had run up to him at that point, shouting, Kakashi-kun. Are you okay? She crouched down beside him, concern clearly evident on her usually smiling face. Yeah, he groaned and stood up, still shaking, I'm fine. It was clearly, without a trace of a doubt, a lie. Why he would lie, Naruto had no idea, but it was obvious that for some reason, Kakashi didn't want to appear weak to Anko. Maybe, no, it couldn't have been that. Not after Kakashi had simply given Anko and himself a curt nod and ran off, releasing a smoke bomb to cover the direction of his escape. So, clearly, it couldn't be that Kakashi has feelings for Anko. It wasn't logical that he would just poof away without so much as a goodbye if he felt anything for her. Kakashi was never one for beating around the bush, and all about the logic, so there was no way that he'd feel something for Anko and not even express the slightest bit of thanks after she showed him such concern. Nope. No way. It didn't make any sense. No way. What Naruto failed to realize is that love didn't ever make sense. Wouldn't it make sense that one man would be able to love only one woman? Then Shikamaru's predicament was illogical as well, wasn't it? Love didn't make sense. Ever. That's what makes it as unique in our lives as it is. Mitarashi Anko was very close to giving up. It was nearly sunset and she still hadn't found Kakashi. But what was she chasing him for? If anything, he was the one who owed her an apology for that afternoon. It was then that she remembered, there was absolutely no way he'd come and apologize to her. So it was that, like years ago, Anko had to go and find Kakashi, and make him apologize to her. He's at the memorial stone. A voice called out from behind her. Turning around, she saw the blonde mane of hair that could only belong to one person. Naruto. Hey, yo, he said, in an extremely Kakashi-like manner. Like I said, Anko Nichan, Kakashi-sensei's at the memorial stone. How do you know? She asked. Did you manage to follow him? No one in Konoha could beat Naruto at tracking anymore. With the enhanced senses of the Kyuubi, he was the best tracker in all of Konoha, with Kakashi a very close second, owing to his large amount of field experience, especially as an Anbu captain. Naruto shook his head, he always goes there when he needs to think about something. That place helps him relax. Anko nodded slowly, probably because it reminds him Obito-san. Naruto didn't know much about Kakashi's dead former teammate, but from what he did manage to gather, Obito's death had been a turning point in his former sensei's life. It was the reason he was always late everywhere, at the very least. Probably so, and from what I could tell, he definitely has some stuff to think about. Care to tell me what that was about back there? She sputtered, why would I know anything about that? Naruto simply gave her a look that clearly said, stop bullshitting me. Realizing that there was nothing for it, Anko sighed deeply. Years ago, and I'm talking about when you were in the cradle kind of stuff, Kakashi and I were a couple. He'd had his suspicions, but to have them confirmed so, casually, was a slight shock to Naruto's mind. So, what happened? He also had his suspicions about this, but to give them voice would certainly hurt Anko, whether they were true or not. There was a great deal of pain in her brown-gray eyes as she spat out a single word, with the strongest contempt in her voice that he'd ever heard from her. Orochimaru Yaro. Naruto nodded solemnly. They'd managed to speak a bit about that time in her life, especially when Naruto himself had fallen to a slight depression, not a common occurrence by any means, but something that happened once or twice in the 4 months they'd spent together. Either way, they had talked about that time in her life several times. She had been very confused then, unsure of her emotions, unconfident of her strength and wishing she had the power to impress the people important to her. Her important person must have been Kakashi, he realized. He bowed quickly and in a soft voice told her, go to him now, Anko Nichan. Be happy. You both deserve that, at least, before he hopped away in what Anko believed was Haruno Sakura's place of residence. She, in turn, turned in the direction of the memorial stone, and rushed there. When she arrived at the memorial stone, Anko had instinctively hidden. She didn't understand why her instincts told her to stay hidden from Kakashi, but she learned long ago to trust them at every turn. They had screamed at her to stay away from the snake, after all. If only I had listened, she thought wistfully, maybe Kakashi and I would still be. She quickly pulled herself away from that train of thought, and instead concentrated on Kakashi, who was, believe it or not, talking to the memorial stone, or rather, to Obito. I wonder, Obito, he said, what would you do in my place? Would you have made the same choice? Probably not. Kakashi sighed. You would have forgiven Rin if she did something like that, wouldn't you, Yubaka? He ended with a sad chuckle. Why can't I forgive her, Obito? Why do I still feel betrayed? Why do I still feel like my Anko is dead? Anko couldn't stand it anymore, and she walked out from her hiding place. I'm not dead, Kakashi-kun. Anko. He stammered. What are you doing here? She began, only to find that the words weren't anywhere to be found. I'm sorry, Kakashi-kun. She said finally, when the words came to her. I'm sorry. Kakashi's single eye shone with some sort of emotion that Anko couldn't recognize, before becoming dull and emotionless, like always, once more. Anko, he said, in a tone that clearly conveyed a wordless goodbye. He went to hop away and lose her again, but she jumped at him and grabbed him by his vest. No, she shouted, Kakashi, you are not running away again. I'm running away, am I? He said venomously, and what did you do 15 years ago, huh? That isn't fair. She yelled at him. And was what you did to me fair? He replied just as loudly, I had no one when you left, Anko. No one. First Obito died, then Rin, then Arashi-sensei, and then my Anko-chan. But I'm still alive, Kakashi. I'm still here, damn it. Maybe, but my Anko-chan is long gone. He whispered, my Anko-chan wouldn't have left me for the temptation of Orochimaru's power. My Anko-chan would have stayed with me, and wouldn't have left me completely alone. Kakashi-kun, she never knew she had hurt him so badly. He always seemed so strong, so stable, so confident. Enough. Kakashi said in a no-nonsense tone of voice. I don't want to talk to you anymore. My Anko-chan is dead. He threw a smoke bomb and ran off. Standing there, alone, the only man she ever truly loved having now shunned her from his life so harshly, Mitarashi Anko did what any sensible woman would have done in her situation, she collapsed onto her knees and began to cry. She must have been crying there for over half an hour before a pair of strong arms picked her up and carried her to the Uzumaki clan house. Thanks, Naruto, she said when he'd set her down on one of the guest beds. No problem, he said quietly. Let's talk in the morning, okay? I'll hear everything then, and I'll help you in whatever way I can. And he closed the guest room door, turning the light off as he exited. Anko bundled herself up in the bed covers, crying herself to sleep. Arg, that idiot. Naruto groaned at Anko's retelling of the previous night. I can't believe he did that. Well, he did, Anko replied bitterly. Her facial expression then changed to one of regret. I'm sorry, Naruto, I didn't mean to take it out on you. Naruto simply shook his head. Don't worry about it, Anko-nichan, he said, getting up from the living room couch, I'll go and sort him out. And he rushed out through the front door, long before she would have been able to stop him. Anko despised not being able to do anything, but she decided it would be best to leave it up to Naruto. 30 minutes later there was a knock at the door. Anko expected to see Kakashi there, or at least Naruto, but instead, she was greeted by a pink-haired individual who had become a part of her life ever since she had returned from the rock country after meeting Naruto. Hey, Anko-chan, the girl said. Hey, Sakura. A kunai plunging itself into the ground at his feet was the first sign that Kakashi was in for a fight. The frighteningly large amount of chakra emanating from 20 feet away, and closing quickly, was the second. By the time the fist connected with his cheek, driving him several feet back, Kakashi realized, I think Naruto's angry. Kakashi, the teen growled, looking for all the world like the Kyuubi in human form, or at least one pissed-off protective baby brother. Kakashi gulped, before ducking below a hail of shuriken tossed at him in a haphazard pattern. What is this about, Naruto? He asked while backflipping and tossed a kunai at the enraged demon vessel. Said man dodged the thrown object easily and jumped at Kakashi, flipping forwards in an attempt to land a heel on the top of the Junin's head. Anko Nichan, was all Naruto would say. Kakashi grabbed the descending foot and spun around with it in hand, throwing Naruto away swiftly when he let the offending limb go. What about her? Kakashi feigned disinterest. He knew, however, by the slight wavering in his own voice, that it didn't work, not on Naruto, and certainly not on himself. Naruto landed into a handstand and flipped himself back to his feet. You heard her. He charged at Kakashi, landing a strong elbow into his stomach, and receiving an elbow to his back, driving him to the floor. She hurt me first, Kakashi said angrily, raising his foot to stomp down and finish Naruto off, but the genin turned around and grabbed the dropping foot. He twisted the foot and dropped Kakashi to the ground, holding his leg in a very effective submission grip. She didn't want to hurt you. Well, I didn't want to hurt her, Kakashi gasped through the pain, and began kicking Naruto's face. Funny how things don't work out like you wanted them to. Tired of getting his face kicked in, Naruto released Kakashi and rolled backwards. Why? He asked the rising Kakashi, why can't you try to forgive her? Why can't you talk to her like a human being? Why should I? Kakashi spat through his mask. What good would it do me? My heart was broken once already. I'm not letting her do that again. Naruto groaned loudly at his former sensei's stubbornness. Fine, then I challenge you to a fight, Kakashi. A fight? Kakashi puzzled. What were we doing just now, then? A fight. Right here, right now. If I win, you go and talk to Anko like a human being, and try to forgive her. And if I win, then I won't bother you about this ever again. Alright, I assume I don't have to remind you of your Nindo. You don't, and you won't. And with that, Naruto vanished. Kakashi looked around frantically, although anyone who didn't know him would think he was just glancing around in boredom, and just barely caught a glimpse of dark blue that corresponded very well with the color of Naruto's new outfit. He rushed at his new target and, upon discovering that it was indeed Naruto, began a full melee onslaught on him, which the teen readily returned. Naruto, Kakashi said as he gasped for air, why does this mean so much to you? Because, said the kneeling Naruto, Anko is important to me. They launched into another series of punches and kicks, but neither had the strength in them to dodge anymore. They had been fighting for over an hour straight, after all. When they broke off from each other, Naruto continued, and so are you, Kakashi. Naruto twisted to avoid the kunai that was thrust at him, but only narrowly dodged it. And you both deserve to be happy. He spun low, and kicked Kakashi's feet from under him, instantly pulling Midnight from its sheath and holding it up against Kakashi's neck, and together you can be, if you stop being such a prick. Kakashi breathed deeply. Okay, I'll do it. He said. Where is she? Anko Nichan is at my house. Come on, let me help you. He picked the Junin up and rested his arm on his shoulders, supporting him as they walked towards their destination. This time it was Kakashi at the door when Anko opened it. She launched herself at him and held him tightly, but stopped when she felt him tense up. Sorry, she said with uncharacteristic quietness. No, it's, Kakashi began at her hesitance, it's okay, just, you know. Yeah, Kakashi pointed towards a tight grouping of trees by the side of the road that led up to the house. After Anko nodded, they both walked there together, on the way passing Naruto, who gave them both a reassuring, encouraging smile. Kakashi leaned up against a tree. Anko sat down at the tree beside it. What happened, Anko? Kakashi asked after a good few minutes had passed. Why did you leave with Orochimaru? Why did I leave? Anko let out a whisper, before speaking up. I was a stupid kid, Kakashi-kun. The bastard promised me power and, she grew quiet. But why did you accept his offer? Kakashi questioned again, more harshly, why did you choose power over me? I know it sounds idiotic, Anko began self-deprecatingly, but I did it for you. When all she received from the man was a raising of the eyebrow, she continued. Kakashi, when we started dating, I was a 13-year-old chunin, and you were already a junin. By the time I was 15 and finally became a junin, you became a special junin, and by the time I was special junin, at age 16, you had already become an anbu. I always felt like I was a notch below you. I never felt like I was good enough. She saw him attempt to speak, but stopped him by raising her hand. I know you never meant for me to feel that way, but I did. I felt like I wasn't good enough, not just as a ninja, but that I wasn't good enough for you. The bastard, she spat the reference to Orochimaru like it was rotten fruit. He offered to make me stronger, so that I'll be worth something to you beyond being the girl you kissed. Kakashi was silent at Anko's confession, but a few moments later, had begun to speak of his own. You were never just the girl I kissed, Anko. He said somberly. I never told you this with words, but I thought you understood. I loved you, Anko. Tears began to well up in Anko's eyes. Kakashi-kun, could you ever love me again? I can't tell you for sure. Anko gave a small sigh, and looked into his single eye. Could you try? And in that moment, Kakashi caught something in her eye, some glimmer he remembered from his Anko-chan, and he knew the answer. He smiled at her through his mask and told her, I can try. What happened next would shock both shinobi when they realize what happened. Kakashi walked slowly towards Anko, and she toward him. When they reached each other, Anko raised her hands to his face, gently caressing it as she pulled his mask down. When the mask had gone past his chin, their faces neared slowly, until their lips touched, ever so softly. The kiss intensified after Kakashi and Anko's initial shock at what happened gave way to how much they had missed each other's presence for 15 years. Anko pushed Kakashi against a tree, where they continued to kiss for a good few minutes. When they stopped kissing, it was already lunchtime, and they chose to eat at the Uzumaki residence. They walked to the door, opened it and came through. Together. 2 weeks, Sakura pondered. 2 weeks, 2 days, 9 hours and 20. She looked at the watch she had on her wrist, the one Naruto had given her just 2 days before, 24 minutes. That was the amount of time that had passed since the last night she spent with Naruto, the night of his birthday. Ever since then, the most time they spent together was about 4 or 5 hours on the odd Saturday, while the average time was 1 hour, maybe 2. The rest of the time was spent working, especially for Sakura, at the hospital training, especially for Naruto, who was doing his best to come up with techniques, train his Aohigan skills, and spar as much as he could, with as many people as he could. 2 days ago, when Naruto had come over to Sakura's place, she all but charged at him when she saw him at the door. It had been a long, grueling day at the hospital, and there was still one last thing she had to do. And she couldn't do it alone. The group that was sent to meet with Sasori's henchmen had finally reported back and given their report to Tsunade. The Hokage gave Sakura a censored version of the report, including hardly anything, aside from one very interesting fact about Sasuke. It seemed that about a month prior, that is, at about the same time as Naruto and Sakura's return from the sand, Sasuke had run away from the sound, and no one there had any idea as to where he had gone. After she and Naruto read the report, he gave her a sweet, soft kiss, gave her the watch, an amazingly elegant piece, of an incredibly dark red, with the hands made of silver, and left, saying he had some stuff to think about. Some 1 month anniversary that was. The day after, she swung by Naruto's place, wanting to talk with him about the previous night and maybe get him out of the house for a date, but when the door opened up, the only one standing there was Anko. She clearly remembered the conversation she had with the older woman. And then he kissed me, gave me this watch and just left. Sakura finished her retelling of last night's events. Okay. The older woman said, well, maybe he just needed some time to think. This is a big deal for him, to know that that Uchiha is out of Orochimaru Yaro's grasp, at least for now. It's a big deal for me too, Sakura said, indignantly. I had feelings for Sasuke for a long, long time. I was in love with him, for Kami's sake. Anko looked thoughtful for a few moments, then began to speak at a slow pace. Well, maybe that's it. Maybe what's what? Sakura asked, confused. Maybe he's afraid that you're still in love with the Uchiha, Sakura. Anko explained. That was always a touchy subject with him, after all. Sakura sighed. The woman was right, of course. There were very few subjects that Naruto was as unconfident about as the subject of her feelings for Sasuke. Feelings that, needless to mention, were entirely a thing of the past. Mostly. Okay. So she wasn't completely over Sasuke, but whoever got over their first love this quickly. Oh, who the am I trying to kid? Sakura should have gotten over Sasuke a long time ago. And with Naruto here, with her, being everything she could ever ask for and always wanted in a man, she really had no business even thinking about that guy. But, for some reason, she couldn't help it. Maybe he's right, Anko-chan, she sighed, not prepared for the reaction she was about to receive. Anko grabbed Sakura's collar and lifted her up about 2 feet in the air, hissing at her. You had better have a very good explanation for what you just said, Sakura, or you're going to need some heavy medical jutsus by the time I get through with you. Anko-chan, Sakura gasped. Because no one, and I mean no one, is going to hurt the kid, so long as he's got me. You get me, Anko-chan, Sakura said when she finally extracted herself from the kunoichi's grasp. I didn't mean it like that, and I definitely don't want to hurt Naruto-kun. Anko looked skeptical, as she said, is that right? The younger woman retorted defiantly, yes, it is. I love Naruto, more than I ever loved Sasuke, more than I'll ever love anyone, it seems. The last thing I want him to be is hurt. All right then, Anko replied, so, if you love the kid as much as you say, then why are you saying that you may still be in love with Sasuke? Because I can't seem to put him behind me. Sakura said, exasperated at herself. I mean, what else could it be other than I'm still in love with him? Anko raised an eyebrow. There are enough other things that it could be. Sakura, off the top of my head, you could be scared that things are getting serious between you and Naruto, and so, when news come about Sasuke, you try to escape to the relationship with him, the one that was always easy, 'cause it never went anywhere. There are a lot more situations that might be the case here, and you still being in love with Sasuke is merely one of the possibilities. She then led her to the door, telling her with the most serious countenance Sakura had ever seen on her face, either way, you need to figure it out, and quick. If you don't, Naruto is going to get hurt. And, if nothing else, I believe what you said about not wanting that to happen to him. And for the last day Sakura had been trying to do just that, to figure out what was wrong with her. And she had come to some useful conclusions. First, she was not in love with Sasuke anymore. Sure, she still held feelings for him, but he was her first crush, and she reasoned that it wasn't unusual for her to still feel something, so long as it wasn't love of the intimate variety. Hopefully, Naruto's thinking would be in the same vein. Second, she was definitely in love with Naruto. Sure, she had already told him that she loved him several times, and it was completely genuine, but, as most people tend to find out eventually, there is a difference between loving someone and being in love with someone. It was a subtle nuance, but one that made all the difference. Because while she was broken-hearted over Sasuke's leaving, she had managed to get over it enough to try and do something about it, get Tsunade to train her, so she could help the people she held dear, like Naruto and Sasuke. If Naruto left her now, however, Sakura knew she would never get over the pain. And if it was her fault,